Hello and welcome to this episode of the Rest is Entertainment Questions and Answers edition. I am Marina Hyde.
And I'm Richard Osman. Hi, Marina. How are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
Yeah, I'm not bad. We're still apart. You are still in Ibiza, but that's okay. We forgive you.
It's unacceptable. I hate being parted. We will be back together next time.
You could just say no to the family holiday.
I could say no. Or you could come on my family holiday, which I'd prefer.
I tell you, your kids are delightful. There's very few families who would agree to come on their family holiday. Yours I could just about handle, I think.
Oh, that's quite a tall order. I mean, I'm not sure I can quite handle it. So well done for at least pretending. Now, I have to start with this one. It's like any other business question. Mike Shearing asks, as mentioned in an earlier episode, Richard, did you pitch Buckaroo, the movie, to Steven Spielberg?
I did not. Do you know what? I had so many plans for when I met Spielberg. I was like, yeah, do you know what? I'm going to do that. I'm going to ask him his favorite 3 Spielberg movies. I'm going to do that. And this is me meeting Spielberg. Spielberg, hi. Me, hi.
Thank you for everything.
Yeah, pretty much. This is me to Spielberg. I got to say, Steve, I think my favorite movie of yours is Jaws. I couldn't hold it together at all. And the idea of pitching Buckaroo the movie to him. Listen, there'll be edits, there'll be premieres. Perhaps by that time we'll be firmer friends, and we can have the Buckaroo chat.
You'll have to steal the IP off someone else, I think.
Maybe he's a listener. Maybe he's a long-term listener, and he'll be listening and goes, "I didn't even hear about this Buckaroo thing. I really like it." You can write it, Marina.
I'm so glad we've just had that Steven Spielberg impersonation from you, which feels very, very special.
It's really good. Actually, it's funny because when he's on TV and stuff, he speaks slightly differently, because how I did it then is exactly how he speaks. Is absolutely uncanny. I gotta tell you.
He's got a TV voice, but that's the real him.
I wonder if I could have a cup of tea. That's Spielberg.
Your American accent is one of my favourite things about you.
Well, I'm going to be in Buckaroo the movie. There's too many things on that donkey.
I thought you might play the bucket.
Listen, does that answer your question, Mike? I'm going to ask you a question, Marina. And Sean Morgan has a question about cold opens on TV shows. They seem to be mostly a thing in American sitcoms like Brooklyn Nine-Nine and Big Bang Theory. Some seem to contribute to the plot of an episode, while others can seem to be unrelated to the rest of the episode. What's the reason for cold opens? When did they begin? And what is a cold open?
Right, okay. A cold open is a sort of brief scene before the opening credits, and it could, I mean, now you can see a 10-minute cold open for reasons we'll get onto, but it used to be a sort of little 1-minute thing. And really the reason they started is in American network television, we don't have this, but they would have the titles and then they would immediately go to a commercial break. So people felt that people who were creating shows, who always sort of slightly hated the commercials and having to break up their shows, felt that you would try and get something in before the show itself, because they would go straight to a commercial break. Now, funnily enough, when the UK used to buy in American shows from this era, we would re-edit it so that cold open would happen after the title. So if the BBC bought an American show or channel or whatever, they would re-edit it. But it's become more of a convention in our things now as well. And in those kind of, monster of the week shows, I don't know, something like X-Files, or even 6 Feet Under used to do that. Mm-hmm. Their cold open was always the death that would form the sort of centerpiece of that week's episode. Often with detective and murder shows, you'll find either the discovery of the body or sometimes the killing itself. It's an exciting way to get you straight into the story, but really, we don't need them now on lots of sort of streaming platforms, obviously, because you can skip even the credits, let alone there are no adverts. So they have become, in some ways, quite self-indulgent. I've seen sort of 10-minute ones before, and you think, oh my God, is this? And you'll see the credits come on, and you'll be like, what? Sorry, I forgot. I thought that happened ages ago. Obviously, things like the Bond movies always did those. There's that kind of crazy action prologue, and then you get the titles. Marvel movies often do that now. It's just a sort of way to plunge you into some quite exciting action right at the start and make you not want to leave. And as I say, that used to be because of the commercial break, but it's become a bit of a convention.
Yeah, in drama, it's interesting. So in drama, as you say, with Bond, it's quite hard to start a Bond movie because you want to start with as much action as possible. Like most stories do not have all their action at the beginning. So cold open gives you, oh, by the way, just before this story happens, Bond is sort of going down a ski slope in a BMW. This is a completely different story, but just before we get on, just watch this, because actually it's crazy what just happened. I wouldn't want you to miss it.
Don't worry, this is an old case that's nothing to do with this movie. he's just tying up some loose ends on a ski slope.
Given it happened, we just thought, why don't we show you it anyway, and then we'll get onto the story.
And then back to London.
Yeah, exactly. But that's a great, you can jump off a dam and stuff like that, and it's nothing to do with the story, but you start with a big stunt, you start with big action, the music starts up, and then boom, you're in, and people understand it as a convention. So in drama, it's just a very good way to absolutely come in incredibly hard. It's like lots of books. You'll start with like a big thing that happens later in the book, and then you'll go back, because actually the start of most stories is just two people sitting around having a cup of tea and a slice of toast. That's where most stories start.
It can be quite lazy. A lot of people hate. My husband absolutely hates it. If it's anything says 6 months early, you see this thing and then it says 6 months early. He's like, so lazy.
I'm just trying to think if I've done that. I think I have.
I had to do it. I've done it once on something, and it's hard not. Sometimes you just have to do it in order to say, "Oh, don't worry, they get their comeuppance for this," because you're about to show a very immoral character, or there's various different reasons. The way I really hate it, and there was quite a lot of talk about this not that long ago, where a lot of dramas would start with something just or the discovery of a female body that something absolutely unspeakable had happened to, and it became such a thing. It's like, why have there been so many rapes in cold opens, or so many kind of aftermaths of rapes or whatever? And it's sort of, I find there's an element of laziness to that, because you're saying, oh, by the way, I'm not going to make you care about these characters any other way. You just have to care about them because something really grotesque and extreme has happened. And it can make me very annoyed if I see that. There are times when you can't avoid doing that kind of a cold open, but in general, it became such a sort of lazy way to do it that and obviously for me, kind of very politically problematic.
We've spoken before about, it's not a cold open, but we've spoken before about something that seems to have stopped now, which is on lifestyle and documentary shows, your Gordon Ramsay type shows, of essentially showing you the 4 big highlights of what's going to happen in the show right at the beginning, which is sort of the opposite of a cold open, but it's for the same reason, which is, boom, we've got to just drop you in here. We've got to make sure you're not going to switch off. We absolutely have to get your attention. They seem to have worked out different ways of getting into those shows now, which is good. But the sitcom one, I think, is interesting, because once you do have this convention that you can have a cold open, which, as you say, comes from adverts, if you're in a writer's room, then a plot very, very quickly constrains the things you can do in a particular episode, or a joke that you've got. Everything has to be in service of the through line of that plot. Whereas a cold open gives you the opportunity, just as a group of writers, to go, let's just do a 30-second gag here, which has nothing to do with the rest of the plot, but it just is perfectly crafted, like a short story before a novel.
It's like a mini play.
Yeah, exactly that. The best one ever, Cheers, often did brilliant cold opens. There's a brilliant one where a guy comes back to the bar who hasn't been in the bar for 25 years and essentially is pointing out all the things that have changed. And it's got an absolutely brilliant payoff. I tell you what, we'll put a link to that particular cold open in our episode notes and also in the newsletter. But I think in comedies, it's a great thing for writers to go, here's a free gag that we can do. In big dramas and books and things like that, it's that thing of everyone's story really starts somewhere small and quiet and boring. And these days, you just want, boom, just drop you in at the most exciting possible moment into a movie. But I love a cold open.
Me too. They can actually, by the way, when you're writing things, be like, oh my God, how we've got to do this thing that's not really related. I think it's much better if they are related. And sometimes you don't really work out why they're related till the very end. And that's the sort of hardest thing to do. And it's interesting that the 2 comedies mentioned in your question are obviously both networked comedies, which means that they are subject to commercial breaks, which is why you particularly see them there. It's funny now when you see them on Netflix, because there's no need for them, but they've become such a convention that people do them.
I had an idea for a quiz show once, which we pitched. I can't remember what happened with it, but it was you did a quiz and you won some money, and the whole thing is you had to get your prize money home. Right, that was what the whole thing was about, and various people were lying to you about whether your coach drivers, and various people were, there were security officers who would, like, you have 2 cases and they take one off you, all sorts of things. But the thing was, you'd done the quiz, you'd won your money, and it was just a question of, could you hold on to the cash to get to your front door, and then you could keep it. And the cold open of that was an absolute supercut of the quiz. So we invented like a whole quiz with loads of complicated rules, but that you would never really see apart from in a series of very quick cuts. And then you see someone winning £150,000 and then cut to them.
Hidden camera on the way home.
Yeah. But just, you would see them just come off set and then someone say, okay, here's your money, let's get you home.
I love this idea.
That was a quiz with a cold open.
Oh, I really like that. I wish it had happened.
Yeah, listen, if every show I'd ever come up with happened, there would be no room on TV. And also there'd be some terrible television.
I love hearing about them. So can you please try and drop one in every week?
Of course.
I love hearing one. Oh, I've very much got one for you, Richard, from Chaz Alexander Smith.
Oh, wow. Chaz Alexander Smith.
I had to pause for you to make something of the name there.
I'm so sorry.
When searching for a new book in a shop, I often give them a quick flick through to see if I like the writing style, etc. In doing this, I've started to notice that different books have noticeably different font sizes and spacing between lines. Is this to disguise the book's real length, i.e. giving shorter books a larger font and longer books a smaller font so they all meet the spine width deemed most desirable to a prospective reader? Or another reason?
Love that spine width. Yeah, a desirable spine width.
And there will be one.
Yeah.
I wonder what it is.
That's like on someone's Tinder bio. I think you find I have a desirable spine width. Yeah, there is a reason for it, really. Most books sort of, that you'll find in the bookshop somewhere between 90 and 100,000 words, something like that. Well, between 80 and 100,000 words. And that takes you between about 300 and 400 pages if you were just having a standard font, standard margins, all that type of stuff. So most books are that, and that's what we're used to. And all of us sort of know intrinsically what a hardback book should look like, how big a hardback book should be. If it's thinner, we instantly understand something which is probably more literary. If it's thicker, we understand probably it's more fantasy based. Or American. So we absolutely get that. There are two ways that kind of font and margin sizes would come into it. If a writer has slightly under-delivered on words, so if a writer has given you a 70,000 word novel, which, by the way, its books don't have to be 80 to 100,000 words, 70,000.
Great Gatsby's about 45,000.
Exactly.
A
Month
good.
in the Country, my favorite book ever, is super short. So don't have to be that long. But equally, it's clearly not a novella. It's slightly in between the two. And so if you've got a 70,000 word book, yes, those font sizes will be slightly bigger, infinitesimally bigger. The margins will be slightly bigger. So you can get it up to somewhere about 350 pages, because that's what it feels like. That's roughly what it should be. If it's a 50,000 word book, you have a smaller one, and you cut your cloth accordingly. But if it's 10,000 less than it should be, really, you just bump it up. I've never delivered a 70,000. Mine are always 90,000. But on the other end of the scale, big fantasy novels, which can go on, forever and ever and ever, and they can be 600 pages. And there is it's not desirable spine size exactly, but it is really expensive to make books. To physically make a book that you buy in a bookshop is expensive. And if you've got an 800-page book, that's really, really, really expensive to make, which sounds ridiculous because it's just some paper, but it's a huge cost on the industry, jacketing and printing and papering an 800-page book. So on those books, they will try and get it down to somewhere around 600 pages. Anything above that is seen as possibly slightly difficult. Robert Galbraith can get away with it. Various people can get away with it, but it's if you have under-delivered by 10,000 words, we'll bump your font up. If you've over-delivered by 100,000 words, then they'll try and bump the font down a little bit. So it is usually things are roughly the same, but there'll always be moments where you think, like, is the public really going to buy a book this big or this small? And often the answer is yes, but often the answer is also no, and that's where your font sizes come into play.
I love a well-spaced book, and I think, oh, look, I've got certain books that I've probably got really old editions, and they're incredibly dense, and it's like, God, how have I managed to only read 20 pages? I've been at this forever, even if I'm rereading it. But I love a really well-spaced out one. You're like, oh my gosh, I'm really caning my way through this one.
I'm the same. I'm so goal-oriented. It's like when you turn over a page, there's a new chapter coming up, and you turn over a page, and there's only one line on the page. You think, yes. I've virtually read 2 pages in 1 page. I'm
on holiday at the moment, so you can imagine I'm doing this all day long.
Yeah. First thing I do when I read any book, I turn to the back, I put my hand across it so I don't literally see the last line or anything, and I see how many pages there are. And I'm like, okay, 334 pages. Because on Kindle, I know it. Kindle, it will tell you how far you are through, but then it's got all the bonus material and stuff, so you're not really that far through. Same with Audible. I put half-hour interviews at the end of my books, and it looks like there's half an hour left on the book. I like to know exactly how many pages I've got left, and I'd like to, honestly, anytime I get through page 50, you're like, yeah, nice. You get past page 100, you think, oh, yeah, now I'm crushing it. And then I always know exactly when the halfway point is. So if it's 336 pages long, a book, then I know at 168, then I know I'm halfway through the book. And then I'm like, oh, this is amazing. It's, every page I read, it's sort of like I've read 2 pages because I'm on the home straight. I'm obsessed. I sense from your silence you're less obsessed with that than I am.
No, I'm not. I notice it a lot, and I notice it's a surprising amount. And although I've never read a book digitally, so I don't get any of that stuff, or listened to one, I'm sorry to say. So I don't get any of that stuff. And obviously lots of my friends do, but I don't do it like that myself. I have to have the physical book. So I'm therefore quite conscious about where I am in it.
But I love it. Yeah, I can't, that idea of not knowing where I am in a book.
I couldn't.
Getting to 60 pages to go, that's when you're like, okay, I need absolute silence.
For the next hour.
Stop the clocks, give the dog a bone. Okay, I've got 60 pages left, and I'm absolutely sailing through. Marina, I have a question from Evie for you. She says, I'm watching the new season of Emily in Paris. Their first episode takes place at the Roland Garros tennis tournament. Would Netflix film at the actual tournament or stage a fake Roland Garros?
Okay, well, this is now Emily in Paris. I do feel we'll have to fully centre it on it at some time, because it has become this absolute cult. People started by saying this is so ridiculous. And here we are as the 4th season starts. So the new season has started. It is now just a cult thing that's in many people's lives. Okay, Roland Garros, the French Open, they would have filmed there, but I happen to know that the strike stopped filming. So they weren't able to film it so when they filmed at Roland Garros, there was no one there. They basically did have to restage an elements of the French Open. Obviously, if they had to take the actual footage from French Open, which is one of my sort of bugbears of international sports footage, it is some of the most ridiculous sports footage you'll ever see. They've always got some new weird camera angles, slow-mos, cuts that are just... It's so idiosyncratic, and it's very, very much like if you saw that piece of footage, you would instantly know, if you watch a lot of tennis, yeah, that's from the French Open. It could only be from Roland Garros. This could only be the package they put out. But yeah, they did actually have to sort of restage a version of it so that it could be filmed for Emily in Paris. I don't think it would conform to the Roland Garros house style, so perhaps it was all for the best that the strike happened.
So what's the Roland Garros house style for this French Open filming style?
Okay, a lot of fades, like weird kind of slightly romantic slow-mo. I think this year they had some mad innovation where they got a sort of like umpire's eye camera when you're looking at these players' strange upturned faces making this or that appeal. Every year they've got something ridiculous, and every year it's a lot of sports broadcasters who have to take the package as it comes become very frustrated with the particular way that the French Open is. Not the action itself, but lots of this other kind of peripheral stuff, because it's so idiosyncratic. And I'm sure it looks very normal on French TV, but for a lot of other people, it's like, what is this?
But if you're Emily in Paris, for example, you would negotiate with the French Open. You would have your cameras in there. You presumably would film a section of crowd where everyone's just signed a waiver. Like if you come into that bit of the crowd, a sign is up saying you may appear on TV. So they sort of film their bits, but probably not the players because of the image rights and stuff like that. But you can film the atmosphere of an event, and you can film the crowd. The crowds are the big thing, isn't it? Because to fill a stadium like that, if it was just you with supporting artists, would cost you so much money. But if you just get permission to go in when there's a huge crowd anyway.
But at this point, I mean, Emily in Paris is just the most mega advert for the French Tourist Board, and that they've got the Monet, the Water Lilies Garden, they've got this, everything. If there's any classic French scene you've ever seen on a biscuit tin, something will happen in Emily in Paris right now.
Which reminds me, we just sorry, this is an absolute digression, and Evie does not want to hear about this at all. Evie, I'm so sorry. We just finished the 4th season of the single best property show on television, which is The Parisian Agency, which is, of all the shows about properties you can't afford, it's the one with the best properties and the most believable people, and just is so beautiful. The family is so wonderful behind it. The properties are absolutely incredible. And as you say, it's literally like an advert for the French Tourist Board. The French Open, Parisian Agency, Tour de France. They might as well all be sponsored by Visit France.
Well, and now Emily in Paris.
Yeah, but Parisian agency, it's the family are just incredible, and the houses, oi oi oi. Does that answer your question, Evie?
This episode is presented by our friends at Sky, proud partners of The Rest is Entertainment.
Can we talk a little bit about the incredible range of documentaries that Sky show?
Please, I love a good documentary.
There's an incredible one called Klitschko, More Than a Fight, which is about Vitaly Klitschko, former world boxing heavyweight champion, currently mayor of Kyiv.
And that comes out on the 15th of August, and it draws on a whole wealth of archive, personal footage, new interviews to tell both brothers' story.
If you love true crime, there's a new documentary called The Body Next Door, which is out now. A really, really fascinating case, a fascinating crime, and a very well-made documentary. But can I save the best to last? The best for me, anyway, which is a documentary that's currently shooting, will be coming up soon. I have just one word for you: darts. You know, the whole world is obsessed with Luke Littler, this incredible 17-year-old. The world of darts is so extraordinary, amazing characters, characters you don't quite get in any other sport. If you
I think it's fair to say.
So yeah, it's a drive to survive for darts, and Sky are currently filming that, and I literally cannot wait.
An absolute banker there.
So immerse yourself in the world's most captivating stories with award-winning documentaries from Sky.
Right, here we go with one from Andrew Brickles, who says, I listen to a lot of speech radio. Whenever a presenter overruns their slot so the quarterly hour break is late, like news and adverts, they often seem to imply that they will be in trouble or will get moaned at by a producer or some such person. My questions are, do they? Who monitors this stuff? And how rigidly should it be adhered to? I imagine them being hauled before the boss's desk and told off, but surely no one actually cares.
Yeah, so they really do care. I mean, there's two different things here. There's commercial radio, which I think Andrew is referring to here, and also the BBC. No, in commercial radio, it's a huge deal to not hit those quarter hours, because essentially each hour of a show is split into quarters, and ad breaks are sold to be played in each of these quarters, and the advertisers know how many people are listening in each quarter, so certain quarters are more valuable than others. So each quarter is worth a different amount of money based on that audience size. Which means if your ad break misses its quarter, those adverts have to be rescheduled to make sure they fulfill their audience quota. The commercial revenue spend is incredibly complicated. So if you are missing that quarter hour, somebody in an office upstairs' job is made immensely harder that day. And there's a huge algorithm that has to go into play of how much money do we owe this advertiser? When can we replay this advert by this advertiser? Because it's so carefully calibrated, because the way that radio audiences are put together, they're very aware that different groups of people are listening at different groups of time. If you think about radio in the morning and people going off to work at certain times, school runs and things like that, 15-minute chunks can be worth an awful lot more than other 15-minute chunks. So yeah, in commercial radio, it is an absolutely huge deal to miss those quarters. Listen, it can happen, and stuff happens, but if you can hit those quarters, everybody in the building is very grateful. For the BBC, of course, which doesn't have that commercial imperative, it's slightly different, but that does tie into, funnily enough, the thing about taking the kids to school and what have you, is we are creatures of routine, and if the 9 o'clock news is not at 9 o'clock, it genuinely spins people out. And even if various features on the show are not at the exact time they used to be, because we all have a rhythm. We're all in certain places when Popmaster comes on, or 10 to the top on the Vernon Kay show. Our lives are sort of built around those radio routines. So if you don't hit the news at the right time on the BBC, it discombobulates people. And people who are discombobulated like to write into the BBC and complain. So again, it's easier if you do hit your marks. But yes, it's really one of those things. And again, as so often in the media, for the commercial thing, it's all about money. It's all about how complicated it is to advertise on a show and the different rates that you have. So they're not kidding when they say they'll get in trouble. And the producer will have a go at the presenter, because the station manager will be having a go at the producer. And it's a genuine big deal. But
it's a big part of the professionalism.
Yeah, exactly. And that's not just speech radio, that's also commercial music radio as well, where it can be harder. So you've got a certain amount of songs have to be played in the quarter, all that kind of stuff. So in some ways it's even more complicated, but all commercial radio has that restriction. Marina, here's one from you, from Joe. Can't do anything with that, Joe. Joe asks, hearing you both talk about Steven Spielberg got me wondering why in the film world directors are the biggest non-acting celebrities rather than the writers, screenwriters. Is there a historical, cultural reason for this? I can name many Hollywood directors, but far fewer screenwriters.
Okay, Joe. Well, historically, it wasn't always thus. Right at the very start, when the movie business started, the director was a really technical job who's just like, can you make sure you capture everything? And they didn't have this status at all. Even in the golden age of Hollywood, really, it's almost like the producers were the star. They were the powerful people. Yes, some directors emerged, like people like Billy Wilder, Frank Capra, John Huston, John Ford. But in general, and there were some big name screenwriters, they used to get in people like Scott Fitzgerald, who all these sort of people used to be brought over and drink themselves to death in Hollywood. They had a hit play and then they were dragged over to Hollywood where they would sort of fester. And
Noel Coward, Woodhouse, they'd all go over.
They'd all go over and get nothing in. But then there were people like Ben Hecht who wrote lots of great things and became sort of well known, but no one was bigger than the stars. It was all about stars and studios, and the stars were not bigger than the studios. They were sort of contract players. But then in the 1950s, the auteur theory emerges in Europe, which is that the idea that the film is the director's vision, and that they are the linchpin of the whole movie, and everything is sort of refracted through them. And that itself, the auteur theory, was very influential on the new Hollywood, which is kind of the bit probably that you're thinking of most, where you're thinking of people like Spielberg, as you mentioned, Coppola, De Palma, I don't know, George Lucas,
Scorsese,
Michael Cimino, Scorsese, all these people. That sort of new Hollywood of the 1970s, they come up with this idea, and they often write their films, but it is very much their vision, and the director becomes a huge thing. Now, interestingly, the writer's medium now surely is, and has been for the last 20 years, is not really you don't really know who writes movies, and often I'll have cycled through about 4 or 5 or 6 sets of writers. Is television. And the big names in television are the showrunners, who are almost without exception have been writers. They're not directors. They don't often direct. Sometimes they direct, but you've got, and it started with people like David Chase, who The Sopranos, David Simon, you've got Vince Gilligan, Breaking Bad, Sean Ryan, The Shield, all those sort of people. And then you think of Jesse Armstrong or Armando Iannucci or people like that. We'll talk about the lack of female showrunners another time, I think, just as I was going to say, I was
waiting.
Yeah. Those have been the auteurs. The writer has become in television, and people are drawn to television because they think, oh my goodness, I can tell a story over maybe 10 hours, or I can tell a story over, 7 seasons. And that has become known, obviously, as the writer's medium. And the names of those writers. And you honestly, with the greatest of respect to many of the directors working for those people, you don't know the names of them, even though there are brilliant people like Mark Mylod, who directs Succession episodes and all sorts of, there's so many, I couldn't sort of mention them all, but you know the names of the writers in that medium. And there's been a real that's been such a sort of bifurcation in recent years, where you think of the movies as the directors and TV as the writers' medium. Whether that still exists, I don't know.
Yeah, why do we think that is? Because it's fascinating, because it's still true. I think it still holds true. In the world of movies, it's a director's movie, and it's a show. TV is showrunners. Is it because they're 10 times as long? Is it that, and you
it's
need
control.
Like
it's control. Yeah. You have the director has all the control on a movie set, and they can tell the writer to do all sorts of rewrites and things like that. And as we've said, people have spent years, writers, trying to get a project, and then eventually it gets bought, and eventually they're chucked off their own project, and other sets of writers are brought in. You have no control. Whereas in the kind of TV showrunner culture, you are more important than all the directors on the set, even though they'll do like blocks of 3 episodes, say, on something like Succession or on lots of that. It's impossible to direct a whole series of this kind of long form television now. No one does that because it's just so much work you're doing. It's almost like you're doing each three of them is like doing a feature film, but it's the control. And so the writer has the most control in television, on that kind of prestige television, and has very, very little still in movies. And it's the other way around for directors.
But that's the length, depth and complexity of the medium. I guess, because it's fascinating watching Chris Columbus, and you see how he's across the script and what it looks like and the actors and those relationships. But within a 2.5-hour movie, that's kind of possible. I mean, they absolutely run themselves into the ground to do it, but it's possible. Whereas if you've got a 10 episode series and then another one, you've got all these different writers, so you've got to be across all the, it's just the sheer length of the thing means that it has to be in the hands of somebody who's able to delegate and be across something creatively and not worry about what it looks like every 5 seconds.
Yes, and very occasionally people will direct some episodes, and Armando directs some episodes, often will direct like the first episode of a show. But in general, other directors are in charge, and the showrunner is the most significant person. Oh, here's very, very much one for you. Richard Cook says, having read several original James Bond novels, Ian Fleming was constantly dropping brand names all over the place. The Bond movies obviously have commercial references, but did he do that in the original release of the books?
He did, yes. He wouldn't make a cocktail without telling you exactly what gin and what vodka was in it. It'd have Gordon's gin and, the cars and the suits and things like that. And I think for him, Bond was supposed to have the best of everything and be the best of everything and, be a connoisseur of everything. And that was a useful way of showing that. It wasn't something he monetized. He wasn't getting paid by Gordon's Gin or by, car companies or anything like that. I think he felt it lent a verisimilitude to his writing and to the world that he was creating.
I think it does.
Because on television, you're not really allowed to do it. If you write a British sitcom, you can't really say Twix. You'd have to say chocolate bar, which absolutely no gag works with the word chocolate bar instead of Twix. So quite often the biggest rows you'll have with the BBC is, you'll say, but surely I'm allowed to say Bisto rather than say gravy granules because it's just funnier. And it speaks to how people live and all that kind of stuff. But in books, you can mention whatever brands you want, whenever you want to mention them. There's
a bit in your new book, which I really like. And I thought, is this the first mention of the Boots meal deal in a book? But I often think, if aliens came to our world and trying to understand our civilization, they might think it was all frightfully highfalutin. What they do need to understand is that a Boots meal deal is part of a big part of the day for a lot of people, and it's very evocative. And not being able to mention those things, I think I love all those things. I love the way you mention brands in your books.
I do it absolutely constantly, and for the same reason as Fleming, but in a slightly different milieu. Yeah, because I'm not doing a lot of kind of expensive watches, but I am doing, Oliver Bonas and, Taste the Difference, because I think I try and write about today, so it grounds the thing in a certain time. And, when you read books from the 1920s, I love reading about real brand names and I love reading about real newspapers and stuff like that. So, I'll always, it's just sort of real, and people in foreign countries love it as well because they don't know the brand, but they can sort of imagine what that brand might be. I might have said before, but the Chinese versions of the books that we talked about the other day, funnily enough, almost half the text is footnotes where they're explaining what lilt is. And the first one, they're explaining, they explain who Lorraine Kelly is. Just the whole thing is talking you through the cultural items and things. And I don't realize as I'm doing it quite how many I mentioned. There's Nigella Lawson and Poundland and all of these things. I love to write about that because people by and large are not walking around thinking about love and loss and things like that. They're literally just, walking past Costa going, blimey, there's a lot of Costas on this high street. It's just, those parts of our world which are so close to us, they become invisible.
But they also are so evocative. Like, Victoria Wood used to do it so brilliantly. Even their little flicks of it, and I don't know, something like Fleabag, where, G&T from M&S. Yeah. And that would be so, that I don't know what that collection of letters means when you're watching Fleabag in America, but to us, we know exactly what it means. And that it's something that gets you right there in the second. And it's amazing how brands can do that. So it made me think of your books.
Yeah, and I should point out, by the way, I'm also not paid to put any brands in because you just want to choose
Boots meal deals in.
Well, you want to do the thing that sounds real, or in certain situations sounds funny, or in certain situations makes you feel nostalgic. So, and those brands are incredibly powerful things. And so, I didn't get paid. Fleming didn't get paid. God, he would have got a fortune, the kind of stuff that he was mentioning.
I know, because these are all status things, but what I love in your books is that they're not status things. They're all, they're the Boots meal deal and things like that.
They're status things to people in my family. It's that sort of, it's it's where you're from, isn't it? It's the little treats in the day.
Yeah.
And for some people, for Fleming, a little treat in the day would be a Rolex. And for me, a little treat in the day would be a Boots meal deal. We're very similar writers. Okay, I was going to ask you a different question, but I'm going to off the back of that. Not brands in fiction, but celebrities in fiction. Ben Hardy, maybe the actor, who knows? He asks, I have just watched an episode of Black Mirror, Joan is Awful, where they mentioned George Clooney in the context of playing Thomas the Tank Engine, and they had a picture of Cate Blanchett as the next level Joan. Will these actors have been required to give their consent? Is there a distinction between a mention, George Clooney, and a photo, Cate Blanchett?
Oh, that is, it is sort of brands. You are using brands because, again, you're evoking something that the audience should be able to get immediately, like the absurdity of, I don't know, Clooney doing Thomas the Tank Engine or whatever it is. The short answer is you can do it, and you can be really quite rude if you're being satirical. I'm trying to think. I mean, I think we've got quite a few in the HBO show I've done that's coming up that I was working on, and previous things I've worked on. We've had some really rude ones, but no, you're allowed to say it. Funnily enough, and even the picture, I think you would be able to do it. Of Cate Blanchett, it's a fair comment. It's a joke. You could defend it as a joke. She would have to be very humorless to say you can't use it. What you would have to have, strangely, is you must have the right to that specific photo or be paying the person for that photo. So, sorry, Cate Blanchett, you're just part of the joke. But if a photographer has taken that picture of Cate Blanchett and you're not paying them for use on the screen, then you might be in a bit of hot water.
That's interesting. If you go on the one show and they need a picture of your mum or something like that, so you send, you say to your mum, oh, have you got some pictures? So she'll send them. And they go, oh, who took that picture? You go, I think that was my nan. And they go, oh, is your nan still with us? No. They go, oh, that's going to be a problem because we need the permission of the person who took the photo. You think, in that context, I'm not sure that you do.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be okay. But yeah, if you ever use a commercial photo, quite rightly, you credit the photographer, pay the photographer. Yeah. But even sometimes for home taken photos, they want to know exactly who took it and whether that person would, because it belongs to that person. If my nan knew that she could have got 27p from the one show.
Sorry, before we go, can I just comment on your ability to make news with this podcast every single week? This is without question my favourite one. I had completely forgotten that during the course of our discussion last week, you said something about you'd fight Jake Paul for 100 million or something ridiculous. I'm looking at a headline now in the Daily Mirror. Jake Paul offered out by Pointless star Richard Osman in £100 million fight, or $100 million fight, excuse me. A story followed up by the Daily Star. Pointless star Richard Osman offers to fight YouTuber Jake Paul for 100 million. Both of them written by sports reporters, apparently.
Quite right. Yeah, of course they're written by sports. So who else is writing that?
Yeah.
To be fair, on this occasion, I did say it. Like you, I can't remember the things that I say, but yeah, listen, I dimly recall I'd offered to fight him for 100 million. And you know what? I probably would if there's 100 million on the table. I'm not going to say no.
Next week, the story is Osman ratchets up his call to fight Jake Paul for 100 million.
I don't think he's going to take the bait. That would be my thought. I think, listen, if Rory Stewart or Alistair Campbell offered to fight him, then Jake Paul, I know, listens to the rest of his politics, and he would be riled by that, and suddenly you'd see Campbell v. Paul. But
Osman taunts stablemate podcasters, you'll never fight Jake Paul.
Yeah,
that's
honestly,
what the next headline is. He's taunting them.
I think Alistair Campbell is too chicken to get in the ring with Jake Paul. That's my view. I'll have to do it for him. I'll have to do it for the coward.
Are you taking this down, Daily Mirror, Daily Star, and potentially the Daily Express? Let's always include them in the mix, because if the others don't do it, they will. If you're listening, Jake Paul, come on, let's get it on. I'm free, sort of, because of the book deadline. Maybe next March would probably be best for me. He always works around book deadlines, I should say. Jake Paul does, yeah. Listen, he's got a lot of colouring in to do. That ties it up for this week. Yeah, that was fun. It was great fun. Next week, I think maybe we'll be together. Thank God we will no longer be parted. Yes. Thank God you'll be out of that hellhole Ibiza. I will be out of it, and I will be bronzed and ready to go in the studio. If you have more questions for next week, send them to us, arrestersentertainment@gmail.com. And other than that, we will see you next Tuesday. See you next Tuesday.